In the end, it seems the Inside the Manosphere documentary on Netflix was just a way to get women mad, get them angry, rile them up. Because if you look at it, there was no kind of understanding of what the Manosphere and that whole environment was. There was no figures from those times in the early 2000s and even prior to try and understand what conversations were taking place and why they were taking place. So in the end, all that was on Netflix was a way to get women mad and point the finger at men and say, look, men are this, men are that. Now, there's a type of man that are not what you need, right? Not what is needed to be able to influence young people. But that's all those kinds of guys are. Influencers who have an audience that influences some young people, right? But there was nothing there. There was no real understanding as to why the Manosphere, all those years ago, which was the blog space, where a lot of men were going online to speak about things that were interesting and most importantly important to them, right? If that was done, that would have been a bit more understanding, a bit more interesting, a bit more insightful. But that wasn't the intention. But anyway, I'm going to play content creators' reaction to the Netflix documentary. And I'm going to also show you what they missed and what they could have included and why all those years ago they attempted, men, to try and get a conversation going about things that today are still being missed. Let me make this clear. I'm not anyone that is in the Manosphere. It's just a neutral point of view looking into why I believe some of the things are where they are when it comes to the online conversation between men and some of the issues that women have about it. I'm just a neutral observer that wants to try and bring something that kind of brings some understanding as to what is being missed about it.
Within 5 minutes of watching this documentary, I was pissed. But hey, for market research purposes, I thought, hey, we're going to watch the full hour. The most ironic thing that these men kept on saying was how much they love women. I just love women. Oh yeah, I love women.
I love women and actually understand them.
Baby, newsflash, you don't. It's okay, baby, go live your truth. No one's stopping you. You don't need to be DL about these things anymore. Just go live your truth. It's because men, and a lot of men, not all men are having an identity crisis. In 2026, men are having an identity crisis because for the first time in forever, women can provide everything for themselves. So really, there's not much of a need for a man. A sperm donor, you can get it. And so because of that, men don't really know where to place themselves anymore.
That's all it's done. It's made women have the opportunity to not be happy about men. And it now includes men to just get shots. She said women don't need men now when it comes to even having a sperm donor. Did you hear that? It's now making shots at men just because. So it's got to a point where you're throwing shots at women don't need men. We don't even need you even when it comes to getting a sperm donor. But a man is the one that will provide that sperm for you to have a child. But anyway, the point is this Inside the Manosphere, it just did a number on men in general. You can do a number on those influencers if you feel. You can just ask them questions in terms of maybe what has got them to that point and how they've managed to garner an audience. You can maybe ask that, but that's all you're going to find out. You know, the extreme side of things, which Louis Theroux said he was doing. I want to find out about the extreme. And that's what he said. So that's all you did. You went to go and speak to guys who have an audience of young boys. Is that a problem in terms of what they may be saying to influence them? Yes, that's a whole different conversation, though. That's a whole different title of the documentary. You know, why are they influenced by these guys who have a popular following? Why? That should be the question, and focused on that. And then obviously focus on how to get those boys in environments where they need help. For example, the annoyance should be about why the issues are not being resolved or not being had for those boys to have a different influence. That should have been the sort of, conversation. Not about these guys who are just guys who have managed to make some moves online, managed to do, garner a following, and then obviously managed to make a way. That's it. But in terms of relating it to what was spoken about to try and help young men or men in general and the conversations that men of a certain type want, that's where inside the manosphere failed.
Like, there's no point in him trying to have any sort of intellectual conversation with these lads who are like still breastfed by their mothers, but also want tits for other uses. Like, it's giving bitty.
No, there's given a lot of mother issues, the whole thing.
The whole thing.
I felt like, who did you hate the most? I feel like, let's get this off our chest.
I mean, I think Tiki Talkie was the most stupid of them all.
I'm doing it for money. I don't care about
the morality of it.
I'm not living for other people. I'm living for myself.
He made that very clear in the documentary as well. He's doing it to make money. He's doing it to try and further his existence and what he wants to do in his life, wherever that is. So I thought the women generally would be more privy to some of the ways that these guys are maneuvering in order for them to be able to sustain themselves and try and make their own way in whatever way they want, right? But the focus wasn't on the issues, and that's where the problem lies, because constantly the issues that are really about what men want to talk about and what men feel about some of the feminism that has taken place and the different waves of it, that wasn't focused on. As to what the conversations were initially and what the conversations has been since, the real issues at hand that are being swept under the carpet and not being focused on, that's where the gripes are. What I've discovered, that's where the gripes are. As to why is there no focus? You know, men on those blogs was talking for many, many years and not being understood. So they had to go on these environments. The blog environments, Blogsphere, which turned into the Manosphere. They had to go there to speak, to really get heard. And this inside the Manosphere documentary did not show that. But let's keep going.
Are you even in the Manosphere? Not really.
I guess so. I am. I mean, I think that that kind of graduated. A lot of people that were in that space are now in politics, and everybody in the Manosphere is just there are people online who are trying to make a buck, you know, selling ideologies, and people have heard all the talking points already.
So that's Nico, another guy that was on that documentary. He said in the past that he's left Red Pill. So Red Pill was also, you know, intertwined with the Manosphere conversation. On this documentary, he said, I believe so. I think he believes he's in the Manosphere, but he left the Red Pill, and that is within the Manosphere. So I was assuming that he's left completely the Manosphere. But he did say talking points have already been had, and people are just out to make money. Is that putting the highlighting on the people who were speaking back in the day, or the men who believe that there's still an issue to be had? No. Again, it doesn't show anything that is relevant to the things that need to be focused on. Netflix, look, they can do what they want. They have their own prerogative. They have their own reasons. But it's just pointing fingers and making men as a whole look like they shouldn't be doing certain things, you know. But men who are doing these things that a lot of women were not happy on, this is not indicative of majority of men. And this is where the issue lies here. It paints men in a bad light. It also makes the general masculinity that should be showed from men, which is a beneficial thing to a group or to people or to, for example, women. It's never toxic and never should be put into the same category. Masculinity is a different way of coming across and a different way of thinking. And it, again, is to benefit, not to nullify. So this depiction and these depictions of the men were not in ways that showed the men who were in those environments speaking within the Manosphere conversation, and it doesn't show the things that should be focused on. But let's keep going.
I'm currently watching Inside the Manosphere by Louis Theroux on Netflix, and I'm not gonna lie, I knew that this culture was like bad, but this is like terrible. I think the thing that gets me is just the amount of insecurity that I'm seeing on my Alexa TV. I cannot believe, right, mothers, my head is going 100 miles an hour. Mothers, I need you to hug your sons. I need you to let your sons process and have emotions. These guys are so deeply insecure. My generation's done. My generation and above, finished. But these guys are so insecure and they're just looking for connection and looking for meaning, all because growing up they weren't hugged enough, they weren't allowed to process their emotions, they weren't allowed to be an actual human being. We just pushed them into the arms of these creeps. These creeps, I swear, like a ton of bricks has more brain cells than everything I've seen so far in the documentary. I've had to like pause it halfway through because the rage that I'm feeling inside of me, I cannot believe.
The moment that actually kept catching my attention was the women that participate in this. Before anybody thinks I've lost my mind, right? This is not about blaming these women or shaming them. I am genuinely fascinated by these women. I think a much better question than why do men believe this and how do men get red-pilled, and let's learn all about the manosphere.
That's another problem. You don't want to focus on why men become red-pilled, why there's a manosphere. That is the problem, and that is something that all those years ago was a problem. You don't understand or want to understand the why. You want to just go back to the women and why she was with a man like that. You want to know the women's perspective. Feminism is one thing. Do what you want to do, right? And men had conversations about the changes of what feminism was doing. The lack of focus on the men in that last point she said is the reason these things came. It was, all right, fine. How do we navigate this? How do we navigate the changes of it in society? Within the 21st century, how do they navigate it? How do they navigate men's issues that don't get spoken about, that men have to sometimes be quiet on and only speak to other men about? How do men's needs get understood? There's this notion that because you're a man, you don't have any kind of feelings or thoughts or issues or struggles or desires, interests, that need to be spoken about. And that is the problem. She only at the end made it clear you don't care about why the manosphere is, or why men became red-pilled, or some men became red-pilled. You just care about why the woman is there. That is some of the men's gripes. That's what I've discovered. That is these neglect, is this kind of, you don't want to understand, some of the issues that are at hand. But also, we're going to have to do some reading. I've got some excerpts from this book called The Manosphere, A New Hope for Masculinity. This one came out, I believe, in around 2009. It summarized what men were speaking about and the types of interests, the types of backgrounds, the types of things that were coming up on conversations within the blog era in the early 2000s. It's not exhaustive of a complete document of obviously everything, but it does show you some of the instances and the reasons why men were on that environment. Now, let's get into some reading. For those who are unfamiliar with this corner of the internet, the Manosphere is the nascent and evolving collection of blogs discussing topics of masculine interests and men's issues. Every day, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of men visit these sites in search of wisdom and understanding about what it means to be a male in the 21st century, particularly in the face of a culture changed by feminism. Right? I've taken random excerpts from that book. So that gives you a clear understanding. Not all the Manosphere is anti-feminist, and few parts are legitimately anti-woman. Accusations of misogyny, while overblown, have legitimate basis. But then again, some of the voices in the Manosphere belong to men who have been savagely treated by women, and the blatant misandry on feminist sites like Jezebel, that was a site in 2007, and it was a site that was able to spew misandry at ease, at will on that site, by the way. But anyway, like Jezebel, is at least as appalling from a social perspective, yet men's issues are not even acknowledged as rising to the level of social concern for most feminists. In the context of gender feminism, as it has evolved, it is impossible for straight men to be victims. The oppressors cannot be the oppressed, right? And even if they are, the suffering of women trumps the suffering of men. Right? No one blames a female rape victim for her misandry. This is an example, they've said. This is just an example. So, for example, no one blames a female rape victim for her misandry, which is man-hating, in light of the psychological and emotional trauma she has endured. Yet a man who has been emotionally or physically abused, who has had his children taken from him, who has been denied justice in a justice system that favors women in domestic issues, who has been financially ruined and socially devastated by a woman to the point where an actual physical rape by the cellmate of your choice will be preferable. In all honesty, that man is considered a misogynist and a whiner by his feminist-leaning critics if he dares voice his anger and rage. The manosphere is an angry place. Feminists love to talk dismissively about the anger there, though, as if male anger invalidates any reasonable point behind the anger. But the anger is understandable by any objective measure. That's because our culture has treated men as a class very poorly, while asking so much from them. The anger in a manosphere isn't, as some critics claim, merely a reaction to the loss of male privilege or a fear of strong women or tired chestnuts. It's real. There is a profound sense of loss, of displacement, of betrayal, and yes, anger in the men who have taken up the keyboard to discuss gender issues from the XY perspective. For the last 40 years, men have been trying to adapt to the chaotic result of the sexual revolution and the dictates of feminism, and at long last they are getting fed up. Right? Those are some of the points I included. Check what it says though. For the last 40 years, this was done, I said, in around 2009. Add on a lot more years from 2009 to now. I thought I'll add that point about some of the manosphere can be not happy, can be angry, but there's a reason. And that is something that if men express their reason, as it said, they're called all sorts. A whiner, they're this. But if a woman expresses her issues, let's listen, let's find out. Because men, oh, they're in the patriarchy. How can they be oppressed? How can they feel issues? And that's the problem. The average man exists. The average young boy exists. So if they're in environments, and an environment living, and they are not getting any kind of benefit, which is a real thing, how can their issues be something not to look into? Because there's this false sense of understanding of the male issues that have been going on for many, many years. Because there's a lack of understanding of men in general, in my humble opinion, in society. And that's the reasons why these things have gone on for this long. But I also show you another aspect of what the documentary missed. And these are from the men's rights activists.
What you'll hear is that we hate women. You'll hear that it's a backlash against women's rights. You'll hear that we're regressives that want women back in the kitchen and making sandwiches and barefoot and pregnant.
You're just bitter, you're a loser, you're a whiner, you're ugly, you're undesirable, you're lazy, you're scary, you must be a racist, you must be a misogynist.
When we do speak out, women often don't want to hear what we have to say. And so then we're called names, we're called whiners.
And this is the way people who don't want men to talk about issues try to shut us up.
This is something that is not new. You are, if you're a young man, there's certain things when you're young, you don't feel like saying. Not because you don't want to. It's the whole perception. And that's a perception that not all men were for, about not being able to speak on certain things. But there's this perception that all men are the same. All men are like those guys on that Inside the Manosphere documentary. So why do we need to hear them? Why do we need to hear them? Why do we need to listen and find out the different facets that are within the different types of men? Because this is what they are on that documentary.
The entire platform of the men's rights movement is kind of like trying to understand a snowdrift one snowflake at a time. It's a very, very complicated matter. Just consider this, that 93% of workplace fatalities are men. 4 of 5 suicides are men. Men are dropping out of higher education at very alarming rates. We're down to 38% now of college students are men, and it's dropping rapidly.
Male suicide, male abuse, male unemployment, male homelessness, male failure in education, male health issues.
We've got the paternity fraud issue, the wrongful paternity issue, a false allegation issue.
Men are sentenced to 63% more prison time for the same crime as women.
They're less likely to see a doctor. They're less likely to have health insurance.
The family court system truly is biased against men. I mean, there's just no question about it.
And it's really the pro-choice for women only movement, because men, they're denying men any kind of choice once a child is conceived.
Her body, her choice, right? Think about men. His body, his choice, not so much.
Because the U.S. government does not want to send you to die. They would rather send me to die.
Young men that are failing to launch, they're staying in their homes of origin far past the time that we would normally expect them to individuate and move out and go live their lives. We have video game addiction, we have pornography addiction, we have the abuse of young boys with drugs like Ritalin to manage their behavior.
So those are some of the points that some of the men's rights activists were making back in the day. And like I say, until the focus gets to certain real issues, there will be no point in bothering. There will be no point in bothering, because these kinds of documentaries and the lack of focus on what's more important, it serves no purpose then, because men will continually do what they have to do, and movements like men going their own way and things of that nature will continue. And on top of that, it affects the future, because at the end of the day, if you want men changed and improved, then focus on the issues that need to be looked into so you can get the better existence that you say is required from men. But if not, let things be a free-for-all then, and focus on raising your kids so you're not seeing them influenced by those influences. If they are so bad, focus on raising your kids. Focus on getting with the right men that you know could be a father if a child comes. That's how it should always be. Obviously, making sure that you're having kids for the right reasons. But focus on that then, because it seems the men have been making noise and noise and noise, trying to understand and assimilate in new ways with feminism. So, if that's the case, and they can't, like I say, focus on having kids and making sure that you have the right male role model in that person's life, in the kid's life. And men will try and figure it out and do what they have to do. Because that's not a good world as time goes on, if men are just deciding to figure it out or not going their own way or not working within the system. That's all not good. So let's see if there's an important documentary down the line.
But if you start to talk about those issues and address them in terms of how they affect men and boys as a group, people get hostile about it. The idea is that men have all the rights, they've always had the power. But if that's true, why can't men talk about their problems?
And that's the problem. The notion that, if they've got all the power, that's not a problem. They've got all the power. Why is there this issue of men having an issue? And that is the thing you're not understanding. Certain types of men who feel this way. But nonetheless, the conversations have continued all the way, to present day. And there has been no clear understanding. There's still women not understanding men in a general sense. Some do. Credit to them. Some understand the general aspects of men, but a lot don't. Still figuring out, but why doesn't men do this, or why don't men do that? Because you've not cared about some of their issues.
Joining me now is Mark Brooks from the charity, the Centre for Policy Research on Men and Boys. Hello to you, Mark. What was your reaction to the documentary?
my reaction and the reaction of many others was it was disappointing in that it didn't actually look at why some young men are going to these influencers. What's their backstory? Why is it that they feel that those influencers, those toxic influencers, the answer to their problems? And so, in terms of the showcasing what these influencers are really about was important, but the disappointment was the backstory about why boys are going on that.
There was no backstory. Just like there was no backstory about why the early days of the Manosphere started. And also there was no backstory on why, as he said, boys are interested in those kinds of influences. So if people really give a damn, you will see it. And it shows they don't.
I mean, do you think it's an accurate reflection of what young men are exposed to in terms of the numbers of the young men that we are talking about and, you know, why they're potentially motivated by these kind of influencers?
Well, I think it's an accurate reflection with regard to their exposure, but I don't think it's an accurate reflection of whether teenage boys and young men actually believe this stuff.
Yeah.
Because I mean, and there's a whole difference. I mean, there's no one more cynical in this world than a teenage boy.
Yeah.
And so they will see this content, but the research continually shows that actually most teenage boys think these manosphere toxic influencers are actually idiots, and they're people that they don't take seriously. But there is a rump of young men, around 1 in 5, who do take these men seriously. And they're often the ones that don't have a sense of purpose in their life. They may not have positive male role models. They may worry about whether they'll be able to get a job. They may not be doing so well in school, for example. And so they're the ones that we need to focus our attention on, rather than the risk of actually demonising all teenage boys as being a problem to be fixed when they're not. It's some. And they're not the problem. We just need to give them a helping hand.
That could have been focused on. These are the issues that need to be focused on. There's issues with young boys, young men. So, again, if you're going to put people in the box, if you're going to put men in the box, you will continually see problems. If you're going to put men in the box and say, this is indicative of the types of men that are the majority or the general man, and this is how they think, you're going to continue to have problems because the main issues are not going to be looked at. If you want things to change, fix these kinds of issues. Help these boys if there's an issue so they can be the future, and maybe we can get somewhere.
And even looking at the other end, if you like, the education spectrum, every September, for every 100 teenage girls that go to university, only 78 teenage boys do. So we're looking at a lot of boys from different angles who are not having the opportunity to participate in normal life. And we need that to change.
It would only change if there is a real care for it. Because these are some of the boys you would say are being influenced, right? Okay, deal with the problems now then. Deal with this now. Let men understand their position, that they should not take away masculinity. They should not nullify who they are as men. They should embrace their confidence, their strength, because that is what builds societies, the leadership aspects. Find out about what boys' issues are, care about them, find out about what young men's issues are, find out about what men's issues are in general, and give a damn and move forward in ways that will benefit the greater good of society if we want a better environment to live in. Let understanding be had. Let understanding be had, and let men say what they actually think, and let it not be censored and be told that they're whining and be told that they're complaining, and it gives you the ick if they give their opinion on this. And you want to keep nullifying men? Okay, look at the result on Inside the Manosphere. If you believe that was a bad depiction of some men, and if you want some real change and some real progress, men and women have to just get back. And I said this in my other video about why men found a manosphere. Get back into roles. Or some people will say it is, restrictive. No, it's not. Once you understand a position, you understand how you have to be in that position. You're clear on your conscience of, okay, I have to be like this. So I'm only going to accept people who are like that, who come across a certain way. I know I value who I am and my role, for example, as a woman. So I'm not going to accept this person, because I'm clear on what I'm supposed to bring. Then you will know the types of men that you should only be accepting. Then men will be clear on their role. Okay, I have to do this. I have to lead. I have to protect. I have to provide. Okay, women want me to protect. Women want me to, assist in certain things. They don't want to push me out. They don't want to nullify who I am as a man. Okay, this is the role I play. Yes, we can still evolve and work and do things and evolve. Put your best foot forward in different instances. It doesn't mean your natural biological makeup should be nullified. Women can deliver children. Men have the seed. That is a perfect connection. If we know these things from a biological standpoint, the importance of the role of a woman's body and what a woman can do and the role of a man's body, just from a physical standpoint, now understand what the mental states of how we think can work if we put them together and understand the male ways of coming across and thinking, the general male, because we kind of generally understand what women want. I used to see so many magazines back in the day, what women want, the top 10 things women want, the gifts that you have to buy, birthday gifts, Valentine's, all these stuff, we know. Then we have to now connect with the emotional side. We know. Then we have to understand the things that you have to just understand from her, because you have to sense how she thinks and feels, because you should be paying attention to your woman. You should. All of these things we know. Generally, a good man knows. But we've been taught also incorrectly. Happy wife, happy life. That's incorrect, because it only focuses on one side. It makes a man's happiness only be able if she's happy. Okay, what about his own? What about his own interests, his own feelings, his own thoughts? That's the problem. The lack of information, and most importantly, the lack of knowledge of men. These are all the growing pains that has taken place to get to this point. So the more you want to nullify and not understand men, the more issues will take place. The more you want to not make men say, look, there is an issue with some of these movements, these feminist movements. Where do we stand if all of these things are now being said and had? And there's a lot of them. I couldn't believe it. There were so many movements. I just found out about feminist movements. There's a ton of them. This feminist, that feminist. It was about 10 plus I found that I've discovered. So there's a lot to look at. But again, if you go back to some of the excerpts I was reading, this is not about women coming up in position and this, that, and the other. It's more about understanding how men can assimilate themselves in the changes that has taken place with how women have changed due to all these new instances of feminism. But if we start getting back to what we are as people, certain each other's best points and roles, yes, it will be better. Things can change and things can move forward if you so want it. But if not, let it be. It will be interesting to find out what people think though. Like the video. What do you guys think? What's your opinion? Let me know.